The first thing I would say is that if we want to do close to nature forestry in a boreal setting, we would need to have very large areas being affected within a single year or two, because the historical development of these landscapes was largely driven by fires that were quite huge by our modern views. The good news is, though, that the way the forest happened in the past is not something that we must repeat in the future in order to have a healthy forest. I am Dan Binkley, and I have had the great fortune to have a career as a scientist trying to understand how forests develop, how they work, how they change over time. Where we are standing, this could be a very successful spruce forest. It could be a very successful birch forest. It could be a very good pine forest. They would grow at different rates, and the wildlife would have different opportunities to thrive. The boreal forest refers to the forest areas of planet Earth where most of the year the cold is the most important factor shaping the trees. It is cold, there is snow, and not a lot is happening physiologically. And then in the short relative summers, that is the time where tremendous activity happens. The boreal forests around the world would often have warm and dry periods, perhaps once every 50 years, once every 100 years, where the fires can start, and in fact it will be so dry the fires will not stop until the snows come. And so the infrequent occurrence of fires, perhaps once in a century, would always have long legacies. A similar analog might be bark beetle outbreaks, where old trees can be killed in large patches of perhaps 1 hectare to 5 hectares over a large region of the country. But it's a large area affected in small pockets, very much like rotational clear cutting may affect a large area, but it tends to happen in what I might think of as small pockets. So the current forestry operations that we might think of as clear cuts, we might even think that a 10-hectare clear cut is a large footprint on the landscape, but even that tends to be small compared to what the historical fires that were often the most important feature would have done 500 years ago. For the long term, the most important question is what happens to the establishment of the next generation of trees? If we have continuous cover where the old trees can remain strongly dominant, we have to ask, are there opportunities for the next generation of trees to establish? And if so, which species will be able to establish and grow well under the influence of neighbors that will be there for quite a long time? And in a boreal forest, we can often expect that spruce trees will do particularly well under the influence of large trees, but we would not expect that birch and pine would do nearly so well. With rotational forestry, the largest trees, of course, are no longer able to exert their dominance on the site, and it can give a much greater opportunity for new seedlings to establish and grow without being held back so severely by the very dominant largest trees. Both of those can lead to very good forests, of course, but the implications for how well they grow, and will we have opportunities for pine trees to grow, or will only spruce trees be able to grow? That's where the influence of those dominant trees becomes so importantly different between continuous cover and rotational systems. When I look at the forests, I see so much variety that I find it hard to come up with one policy that I think is going to be appropriate in so many places. Close to nature forestry in a boreal forest should not be expected in any way at all to match close to nature forestry that would be suitable for Central European temperate forests of completely different character. But in fact, when we come out to a forest where one story never applies everywhere all at once, and it never applies at one location for very long because forests are always changing, a strict policy will not work well in many cases. There's an old joke in English about if the only tool I have is a hammer, everything in the world looks like a nail. Well, if some things are screws and some things are nails, it does not make good sense to use the hammer on the screw. I should have a different policy and use a screwdriver here and a hammer there. And so from my views, policies need to be wise, but they also need to encompass the variety of desires of societies and the varieties of forest conditions that are found in different locations.